I got one for you. Titty bip, titty bip, titty bip, bip, bip. There you go.
Titty bip, 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 bip. All right, so everyone, welcome to Millennial Man. And people are fucking texting me on my phone. Tired of it. Anyway, we're going to be talking about the first Silent Hill today. I got a guest with me, good friend, who I affectionately call Chavo as a nickname, but his real name is...
Jesse Chavez. That's where the Chavo comes from.
Yes, like a drug dealer. But today we're not specifically peddling any drugs. We're going to be talking about the first Silent Hill, and it's kind of just going to be our perspective on it, just what we took away from it. I actually barely even completed it for the first time. I want to say like a year, 2 years ago, and I was fortunate enough to find my local record store selling a guide for it for like basically nothing, which is, pretty neat considering how expensive the guide is. But yeah, did you want to recap kind of what Silent Hill is, Chava?
God damn it.
All right. Did you go to nowhere?
I went to nowhere.
All right. So the Prima official strategy guide for Silent Hill says, welcome to Silent Hill. Imagine you're the recently widowed father of a 7-year-old who has his first real chance for a vacation. You're driving down a dark, peaceful highway, your daughter at your side, looking forward to time off. Time off is all Harry Mason had in mind when he started out with his daughter towards Silent Hill. But as they near the town, the peace is shattered by the abrupt appearance of young girl. I'm going to say they meant to put appearance of a young girl on the road ahead. To avoid hitting her, Harry is forced to swerve to one side and into one wall of a concrete overpass. Harry awakens in the wreckage to find his daughter missing, and the monsters infesting the eerily unpeopled town. Is it a dream? Is it real? What happens next is up to you. Prepare to enter the dark, mysterious, sometimes disturbing world of Silent Hill 1.
Yes, the one that started it all, at least for this series.
Right. So, I mean, basically what Silent Hill was, if I'm remembering my notes correctly from the last time I kind of went over this, was that it's a town that is stuck in some sort of spiritual turbulence, and it had to do with Native Americans, and that whole, like, area where the town is just, like, full of just psychic energy and, ghosts and everything. It's never fully explained that the town, why it drives people to go there except for in this game. Usually it's just for something that they have to overcome almost. It's like a challenge, right?
Something of that sort. The land is very, what's the term I'm looking for? Psychically sensitive. It really intunes itself to a particular individual, and it molds and reshapes itself accordingly to reflect what's going on internally in them. In Silent Hill 1, before we had the context of the later sequels, it could have just been written off as demons overtaking the town. But in hindsight, it becomes very apparent that a lot of what we're seeing is the dark reflection of the inner pain of a little girl.
Right. And this is... a contrast to other characters who would come to the town and hear the same beckoning call eerily that would drive them or draw them to go there. And in Harry's case, he's kind of unlike other protagonists. He's just an average Joe with average abilities, and the game definitely shows that, that his handling of weapons, he's kind of just, swinging erratically and incrementally better with the experience, but in the end, he's still kind of like a lousy shot at a distance. Harry his basic mission is really just to go there and save his adopted daughter, which might be one of the most endearing story-driven aspects of any video game ever.
Well, yeah, to put it in context, when this game came out in '99, it was, it was very easy to write it off as a Resident Evil clone. You have ammo, you have weapons, you have enemies that you have to shoot, puzzles to solve, all that jazz. I think part of the way the team tried to combat that was you're not going in as a super cop. You're not going in as someone who's, well versed in weapons. Harry's clumsy. He stumbles. He gets winded real easily. You can't run for long, extended periods of time. And trust me, even on the PS1, this town is huge. You kind of have, it's not even so much that he gets better. You just have to get better at handling him in these situations, juggling between melee weapons and handguns as he fights tooth and nail to get back to his kid.
The steps he takes to overcome everything that stands in his way between him and Cheryl, who is his child, adopted child. But before we even get into the game, I just kind of want to talk about the aspects, like you were referring to, Chavo, about, what sort of made this game special in terms of its qualities and its little idiosyncrasies. And to me, first off, it's the camera. I mean, in Resident Evil, you could not move the camera. It was a fixed camera. And sometimes in this game, you can move the camera, but sometimes it will be fixed, but it's only to point something out.
It's a dynamic third-person camera setup. There's still camera angles. It kind of gets freebase when you're out on the streets, but you'll still get the dramatic camera angles of Resident Evil, but because it's a fully realized 3D environment, the camera can be more cinematic and scoped down. That's part of, I'm sure, why Christoph Gans copied so many camera angles from the first game and put them in the film, because they were already filmic.
Most populated part of the town, even more than the actual cityscape, are the fog clouds that create absolutely no draw distance whatsoever, and that allowed the Team Silent, which is what they were called, the team who made this game, that, like you said, Chavo, it was fully three-dimensional, whereas in Resident Evil, it was just static images that were placeholders for things like walls and so on and so forth, bits of the mansion, and then there's even the blocked-off roads that make open areas to the town even more eerie. So it's very different than Resident Evil in that aspect, and especially the fact that even in the town, enemies do roam freely inside and out of areas.
Yes, the air screamers in the game, which are the large winged beasts that chase you on the streets, they will aggressively chase you multiple blocks. So you either have to duck and dodge and get them caught in some trees and get the distance fast enough where they lose you, or you're going to have to put them down.
And all of these things kind of make for, a shit ton of detail in a world that essentially at one point changes every aspect of the map. It's a complete overhaul of, deliberate detail that becomes warped, and your expectations of zones just are not the same your first run through. And we'll get more into that later. I mean, most Silent Hill fans know what it is, but it's kind of the changing of the town when you hear a siren, and it makes for an absolutely stunning PS1 video game. I mean, people can go back to this and be like, it's ugly. But growing up with PS1, man, what a beautiful game. When was the first time you played this, Chava?
Well, let me tell the story of how I came across this game in the first place, because it's a long history. I got a bunch of computer magazines from my uncle, and one of them stuck out to me because it leaned more towards console gaming, and it was talking about what was new and fresh at the time. I remember it was talking about the Dreamcast and how revolutionary it was, and showing early designs of what they thought the PS2 was going to look like, which was basically a silver Dreamcast. Way too compact, by the way. It was the size of like a PS1 Slim. In the magazine, they had the second half of a free walkthrough for Silent Hill, and it's a spoiler-free walkthrough. So I got caught on that after reading the review for the game. I was, even with all the spoilers and context taking out, I was really enthralled by where the plot was going. And I had this whole version of the game I was picturing in my head as I read it. And then of course you get to the ending and it's there's multiple different endings you can get, but we'll let you figure out how to get them. Which, young me is bullshit. I want to know how it ends. And this is pre-YouTube. This was I want to say 2002. So I couldn't just go on YouTube and look up a full playthrough of the game. So I had to hunt it down, and eventually I found a really beat up rental copy that like sans case and everything, and I bought it. back in the day when you can get a rare game like that for like $15.
Right.
Those were the days. And I played through it, and it didn't match quite what I was picturing in my head, but I was loving it. I was loving every second. Like this was like after I'd played through Resident Evil 2 for the first time, so like I was starting to branch into my taste of survival horror video gaming. And I just remember like I was gobsmacked. The cutscenes looked fantastic. Definitely pushed the limit for what the PS1 could do. And honestly, I think with a little tweaking, those actually look better than some PS2 game cutscenes. They're the character face designs. They're very photorealistic. They look like real people.
And do you remember the name of the specific creator who did all the cutscenes? Because that's a whole story in itself. Where
I wish I did. I really do, because I remember the story too. Like Konami didn't want any part of it, and he was like, "Well, I'm going to do this anyway because it's important." And they're like, "Fine," but what was it like? They weren't going to pay him if it didn't work out.
He'd had a certain amount of time to do it, which was basically he lived in his office for 6 months. He had to do it all by himself. It was done by one man. All of these beautiful cutscenes. Secondly, he did not have any American people or actors or anything to go off of. He literally was just like, I'll try and make it look, like American people. And if he didn't do it, then I believe, then he was not going to get paid a full amount or something like that. But the most important part of the story is that it was one man. He had to do it under a certain amount of time. And when he did do it, they still weren't impressed. And he said, if you do not, let me become like the cutscene director or whatever it was he was requesting, then, I quit. And they were like, well, we can't let you go. So, okay, we'll give in to that demand. And so basically, ever since then, he was like the dude who ran all the cutscenes in every Silent Hill. And he's the one who, when the second game, when you see James Sutherland, the Asian man who does the hand over his face, imitating that first scene, that's the guy. That's the guy who did this. So,
yeah,
it's a pretty neat story.
I'm pretty sure for facial reference, he definitely pulled from celebrities. They've never confirmed, but Harry always looked quite a bit like Bill Pullman, and Sybil kind of looks like Natasha Henstridge just a little bit from Species.
That's true. I kind of saw Harry too as what's his name from Waterworld? Kevin Costner.
Yeah, maybe he could have been a mix of the two.
Mm-hmm. But that's a sweet story. So did you just play it all the time, or how?
I played it religiously. Got all 5 endings. Got all the weapons, and then eventually, that led to me trying to hunt down Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill 3, and it was a huge gateway for me, both as a gamer and as an artist, because it led me to a lot of other things that I'd come to really love. Twin Peaks was the reason I love Portishead. I had a Freudian slip there. Silent Hill is the reason I love Portishead, and it is also the reason I love Twin Peaks and a lot of David Lynch's work, because they draw heavy inspiration from it. And then eventually I tracked down copies of the other games, and Silent Hill 2 onwards, honestly, even a little bit with 1, it really expanded my critical thinking capacity. Like once I started being able to learn about the symbolism of some of these enemies and like how that works, it kind of gave me a jump start on how to do that in writing, and how to pick and pull from the psychological aspect of it all.
Right. It is definitely a course in writing, especially when it comes to changing stereotypes. Usually, the father, would be going after just his real daughter. In this case, it's an adopted daughter. And, the head of the cult, cults vary on what they're usually after. In this case, the manifestation of the town using what the cult's doing to put shit in Harry's way is kind of not a abjective, but like an obscure way of going about storytelling, especially with using Alessa and Cheryl as a device to further push the plot forward. What's the best way you can think to describe? Because it's Harry's daughter is Cheryl, but Alessa isn't specifically Cheryl. How would you put that in a good way, Chava?
I guess if I had to put it in a certain way, I'd say Cheryl in the story is Alessa's parallel. She's Alessa had she grown up in a loving, nurturing home. It's part of their theme of duality that gets expanded on later in the series. But essentially, what she ended up doing in the story was splitting off a piece of her soul, incarnating it as a baby, and, giving it a fighting chance at a normal life. And the only reason she calls Cheryl back to the town, because Cheryl's the reason why Harry's there. He wanted to go anywhere for a late summer vacation, and Cheryl was like, Silent Hill, I want to go to Silent Hill. And he's like, all right.
It's not as erratic as the movie where she's just screaming, trying to jump off waterfalls. Silent Hill!
Yeah. It's a bit of an extreme jump they went on that one. But yeah, she's part of why she wants to keep her away is because when her soul is incomplete, the cult can't harness her power in the story.
Right.
And, of course, once they catch on to what she did, they, kind of force her hand and make her call her back, because she's crying out in pain. So Cheryl has this weird innate sense where she needs to go back to the town. She doesn't even understand why completely, but she does it.
And it's great storytelling in that aspect. It's a good way to start off where, we're with Harry, we're in the town, and we're running around, and we're following what looks like a shadowy character, could be Cheryl, through the town. A little blood appears on the sidewalks. All this just a great lead up to what we finally get. These enemies in the game all mean something. They have a dark history with Alessa, and furthermore with Cheryl in that case. And Harry's exploration of the town begins off very eerily.
Yeah. Again, kind of the edge that they gave Silent Hill over Resident Evil, because again, that one, they're both survival horror, but Silent Hill is much more of a psychological thriller in the way it's written and the way the story unfolds. You kind of get led to various clues of these different locations that are connected to Alessa, and you get little bits and pieces of her past, all while Harry is essentially chasing this ghost. He's chasing her around town while she's putting down these marks because she's trying to seal the town within itself to keep what's going on from spreading beyond the town.
Right.
He doesn't know that, though. He has interference, of course, through her mother, Dahlia, who's kind of feeding him of oh no, she's a demon child, she's evil. It's not actually a child, don't trust it. It's got your daughter, and if you want to save her, you need to kill it, or you need to catch it.
It's kind of weird because you're trying to play off the fact that you're the father, and you're like, I got to save this kid, and that's your whole motivation for the game. And then there's these, counter bits of the story where it's telling you, no, don't do that. And you just have to trust your instincts, which of course is you got to save Cheryl.
Yeah, it's a recurring thing in the series where if a character's seeking a particular truth or person, they have to do things that are against their best interest. It's part of the testament to Harry Mason, and I do like what they do with the character, and I don't want to say it's necessarily a stereotype that a father wouldn't go out of his way to save his child, even if they're adopted, because I feel like that's kind of, we don't want to be reductionist about it. It's not saying that foster parents are like, oh well, if I had to pick between saving a child, obviously I'm going to go for the birth child first. Fuck you, adopted kids, you're on your own.
Right. I mean, we've all seen the good son. Sometimes even the real son isn't good. You just got to drop him.
Exactly. But I really do love the character for just how determined he is. And he's just, in general, a very good person. And it's very interesting, again, in hindsight, seeing that in contrast with the imperfect character we got when they reimagined this game for the Wii for Silent Hill Shattered Memories.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully that could be a good future episode.
Yeah, at some point, definitely. I definitely have an intro for it. But, the whole thing, too, about Resident Evil and comparing it as a clone, one of the things that rings just so supremely great in the horror aspect of my mind is that when you get to a save room in Resident Evil, I mean, it's basically a safe room. You're safe from harm. You're safe from everything. That's what a save room is in pretty much all of Resident Evil. I mean, there's like maybe one or two cases where it's not as safe as it should be. Can't think of any directly off my head, but I know there are a couple cases. But anywho, that's usually what you're led to believe in survival horror games. And in the case of Silent Hill, your first save room in the diner, you actually get attacked.
Yeah, it doesn't waste much time. Well, the game, that's not even the worst part. You know, if you want to go further back to when the game actually starts, you're chasing, your daughter through the streets, and then you end up cornered in an alley and you get murdered, and you think, oh shit, like literally 4 minutes in and I'm dead. And then you find out you're supposed to die. It's all construed as like a bad dream. And you wake up and you meet Sybil, and then she gives you a gun. So you have a fighting chance. And you have to gather all these supplies you're going to need like throughout the entire game. And then you get ambushed again, except this time you have something to defend yourself. So it's like, all right, for real now, let's see if you can make it.
And Sybil, we should say, is the police officer in the town who also doesn't know what's going on, but she helps you out very, very much.
Well, she's not from the Silent Hill PD. She's from Brahms, the next town over.
Town over.
Yeah, she's investigating because all contact with the town got cut off.
Right. So it's kind of a nice little retreat from the fact that you feel like you're the only one when you're not. She's also just as confused as you are about what's going on, and she kind of plays into the story very much so in a big way. She's a good fact and a good side mission. But Harry's first task, if I remember correctly, he has to go get keys, which is, I guess in this case, very survival horror for that era and just in general. But he has to go get keys to unlock the door to Cheryl's house.
Well, it's nobody's house in particular. It's
okay.
It's you find notes, and it's how Alessa kind of lures Harry to keep going and pursue his quest. She'll leave like little hints here and there. This one was, there's a doghouse on 11th Street, and you check the doghouse. There's a key inside. Go inside. There's a door with 3 locks you need to hit, and you have to go like all over the other side of town to find these 3 keys, all named after Wizard of Oz characters.
Mm-hmm. Key of Lion,
Scarecrow, Woodsman, who's the Tin Man.
Mm-hmm. It's a very nice callback, and we should say too that if anyone has ever not played the first Silent Hill, and they're like, man, that just looks tough or something, trust me, this is not a tough game at all. And you have a full-on map that points you to every single place you need to go almost. And the town, while open, isn't that huge, I would say, in my opinion.
I respectfully disagree on that one. It's pretty expansive. You have to go through 3 different sections of the town, and that's not counting all the interior locations and stuff. It's when I recorded footage for this game, it even editing like as many detours as I could out, it was still 3.5 hours.
Right. I should say that, I mean, when I first played this game, and I even though I have a guide, I didn't use it. I pretty much found all 3 keys within, I want to say, less than 30 minutes.
Oh yeah, like especially you can take it down to 15 if you really know what you're doing. You like all like one foul swoop, stop by, grab the top one, go through the alley, grab the next one, and grab the other one that's hidden like in a mailbox.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, it wasn't that difficult, and then going directly from that is when you get your first. You end up on the back porch of that house from the door you're trying to unlock, and you get your first siren, and everything goes black, and you have a pocket flashlight, and basically you're in the other world, is what it's called.
Everything goes dark. The land itself doesn't change, but it's just like a nighttime hit out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm. And what was your favorite part of the game? Would you say it's the school, Chavo, or just the town? Because the school is the next part, which to me was my favorite part of the game, almost.
Location-wise, aesthetically, it's definitely the school. Gameplay-wise and story-wise, I want to say it's more so the hospital, Alchemilla Hospital.
It would make sense story-wise.
Yeah. You have, like I said, you have to hit all these locations that are tied to Alessa in one way or another. The school where she was tormented, the hospital where we find out she was kept in a basement room underneath, suffering from severe burn wounds, being kept as like a dirty little secret.
Is it the school also where you get the cutscene? You learn more about Dahlia and what she was trying to do with Alessa?
Not necessarily. It's I want to say you'd find more stuff like that in the hospital.
That's right. I think what I'm thinking of the school, it's the notes on Alessa's desk where she kind of there's this moment, this very poignant moment where you enter a dark room of many, and Alessa's desk is all by itself, which kind of shows like how much of an outsider she felt in her own school, and she has this note on it, very fairy tale-esque.
Yeah, everyone's calling her like thief and witch and telling her to go home. The movie did a pretty good job picking up on what they were doing in that and drawing out more of why she's ostracized. But overall, I think what it really was just she was feared. We find out the cult was using her powers as, they're using her as muscle for the cult to basically get rid of anyone who got in the way of their plans.
Yep. The thing with the school too, and you learn this right off the bat because this is really your first time where you get an area to explore. It's almost kind of like the mansion of the RE PS1 game. You kind of start learning your way around, and it has different levels. But the easy part about it, in my opinion, is that the riddles come with objectives, and you go to those rooms that correlate with those riddles. And it's easy and fun to understand, and oddly, Silent Hill and RE1 both have piano puzzles, even though they're slightly done differently, which is kind of a nice little, like samesies type thing for both of the series.
Yeah. The difference being one of them requires you to find sheet music and item hunt, and the other one requires you to actually push keys and try to figure out proper order. But there's something to be said about the puzzles in Silent Hill, kind of touching on what I was talking about earlier about how the town is very sensitive to, certain people's problems and how it changes and reflects and revolves itself. There's a lot of pretty much almost all the puzzles, I want to say, tie back to Alessa in one way or another. All of the character designs, the screaming flying monster, the air screamer, I think is what it's called, is based off of, she loves storybooks, and she has The Lost World in her Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's The Lost World in her room, and that's where that one comes from. And she has teddy bears with claws and a giant moth you have to fight, and then you find out she's got like a bug collection in her room and one's missing. I really enjoyed that aspect.
Kind of like the little poems that you hear are good hints to what's to come. It's a little bit of foreshadowing when, you read a book that says, hearing this, the hunter armed with bow and arrow said, I will kill the lizard. But upon meeting his opponent, he held back, taunting, who's afraid of a reptile? At this, the furious lizard hissed, I'll swallow you up in a single bite. Then the huge creature attacked, jaws open wide. This was what the man wanted. Calmly drawing his bow, he shot into the lizard's gaping mouth. Effortlessly, the arrow flew, piercing the defenseless maw, and the lizard fell down dead.
Yeah, that was the game's nice way of giving you, if you're really good at exploring, the game encourages you to explore everything you can find. That story bit was a good clue on how to kill the boss, the first big boss, in 1 or 2 shots.
Right. The fairy tale lizard monster is the first boss in the game, and there's something to say about this because, to its competitors, which at the time was Parasite Eve, Resident Evil, Alone in the Dark, which I never played Alone in the Dark, at least to the first boss outside of the PS1 era. Boss fights, I mean, you did what you could. You did the best with the technology you had at the time. And the lizard monster in Silent Hill 1, while not a bad boss fight, is more interesting to look at than actually difficult to fight.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
It's very good at easing you in, and it seems like the bosses kind of up their ante as you progress to the story.
Mm-hmm. right after you beat it, when the lizard fights end, the Dark Nightmare world dissolves into the dim light of the boiler room. A young woman in a blue dress stands near the boiler, and she vanishes before you can talk to her. And in her place is a shiny key, the K. Gordon key. Has an address to a place on the town map, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and it's also a reference to Sonic Youth, Kim Gordon.
Yep.
You can find all their names listed in the teacher's registry.
Mm-hmm. And this is kind of the cool part about Silent Hill, just like Resident Evil in this case, is when you leave the mansion in Resident Evil, you go out and you do your tasks outside of it, and then you come back to it later and it's a little different. Kind of the same with Silent Hill in a way, where you go out to the school from the town, and then you go back into the town only to head to the church, which is a nice little change of settings, in my opinion. Just more open, way more of an experience in a small instance or a small case than Resident Evil just being stuck in the mansion grounds.
Yeah, it's part of the appeal for the way the game is designed, because you get plenty of buildings to actually explore thoroughly, but you still feel like you get, freedom to roam around this fully realized town, walking through the streets, checking out these alleyways. Maybe you'll find extra ammo, maybe you'll find more enemies. There's a certain freedom that comes with it that's very liberating.
Yeah, or maybe you'll see a chainsaw in a window.
Yes, one of the many numerous horror film references that I'm sure everyone who's played the game a few times is familiar with. You got cut-right chainsaws from, what was it, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2?
1 and 2, yeah. And then you get a yellow chainsaw as well in Evil Dead.
Yeah. Although I think the one in this game is red.
Oh, that's right. No, you know what? Red was in the poster of Evil Dead, I think. And then yellow in the movie, yeah.
Yeah. We'd have to wait for the next game before we got a more on-the-nose Evil Dead reference.
Yes, this is true.
I really love the fact that they weren't ashamed to put in all their references and stuff, because what I love about Silent Hill 1, I've always said this, it feels very much like classic American horror filtered through the lens of Japanese horror. And there's massive influence everywhere. Like Alessa, obviously based off of Carrie from Stephen King's Carrie, a girl with psychic abilities who's abused by her religious zealot mother. You have references to The Fog. You have, oh gosh, what else? Help me out here.
Obviously, Twin Peaks. And then Jacob's Ladder.
That one definitely became more prominent. Definitely planted the seed, but it became more prominent in the sequels, especially the third one, where I think they just flat out lifted locations from it.
Right, but this is definitely that first, oh, well, what other movies can we watch? And somebody had to have watched Jacob's Ladder just for, what was going on. And I almost even want to say that, Poltergeist played a big part in this as well.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, instead of a haunted house, it's a haunted town. You moved the tombstones, but you buried it over the graves.
Yeah. I feel like they're you could really dig in on some of the things that they pulled. Touching back on Twin Peaks, the diner you start in feels very much like something from Twin Peaks. I think the series helped give them that sense of Americana that they really wanted to capture with the town. And then of course there's the character of Lisa Garland, Alessa's nurse, who's obviously based off of Laura Palmer.
Yes.
A blonde woman who's at peril because of her drug addiction and is fated for a tragic end.
Mm-hmm. And someone holding
who keeps a diary
something over her. Yeah.
Yeah.
What would you say, because there's a part later on when you go to the hospital where the elevator, you try all the levels and everything, and then you leave it, you come back. Mysteriously, there's now a fourth floor that wasn't there to begin with. What do you think that was lifted from? Because I know it has to be from somewhere.
I think that's just supposed to touch on a superstition, possibly a Japanese one, about that being like a like this. I think the number is supposed to symbolize death, possibly.
Oh, it's kind of like how there's no 13th floor or whatever on regular American buildings. Yeah.
It's either that or just at base, it's just, ooh, that floor wasn't there before. Spooky.
Ooh. Yeah, Alchemilla Hospital. This is where the game to me started clicking hardcore. And the reason being is because, as everyone should know, or if anyone doesn't know, in Silent Hill, the enemies mean something, as Chavez pointed out before, specifically in the hospital. The nurses and doctors, they have these things on their backs, and they're almost like being pulled by strings as if they're puppets. And that plays up to what's going on with Alyssa and Cheryl.
It's much more literal in this game. I mean, they definitely repurposed the nurses for later sequels, but the puppet nurses in the first game definitely symbolize Alyssa's fear of hospital staff, because why would she? The hospital brings her nothing but pain.
And Lisa also being one of the main characters we find in here, as you said, drug addicted, beautiful, sexy, and apparently we learned to find this out later, is that she's been, dicking around with Kaufman.
He was the director of the hospital.
Director of the hospital, that's right. And he was the one helping helping the cult perpetuate Alyssa's pain by keeping her there, and he was the one who looked over her, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and covered up what happened to her, because essentially I think he was the one who sold the story of, oh no, she died in a mysterious fire, so she's definitely not alive and under our hospital right now.
Mm-hmm. And Lisa, I have to say, and this rings true even through, I want to say, the second game, Lisa's still like one of my favorite characters in all of Silent Hill.
She's got an interesting place in the grand lore of the story. A lot of people, much like Laura Palmer, they kind of romanticize her, and they place her up on a pedestal and see her as this completely angelic figure, when she wasn't perfect. She definitely made mistakes and has a bit of an unsavory past to her, but she's still, at her heart, she's still a good person. It's just, she's a complicated character. It's not black and white with her, if that makes sense.
And she probably has the most heartbreaking scene, which, this is going back to PS1. In the case of Silent Hill, the one guy who had to do the cutscenes, there was no voice acting to convey what was going on, and the heart-wrenching moment with Lisa and the blood going down her face and her kind of falling to pieces when she learns more of what's going on in the story and what's happened to her. It's just like almost brought me to tears. It's just a sad, tragic, little episode, and it's just done beautifully.
Yeah, she finds out she's no different from the puppet nurses who roam the halls.
Yeah, she's also just there as another pawn.
Another distraction for Harry. That's probably the part of Alyssa through Cheryl that doesn't want to see him come to any harm. So there's a part of it that's just like, no, please stay here where it's safe. Stay out of the way.
Mm-hmm. And it happens in a red room, which was I always thought, like, man, that's very Twin Peaks. This is like more Twin Peaks than I thought.
How did you feel about the acting in the game?
I want to say when it started off, I wasn't sure, because it's just so, I don't want to say few and far between, but I want to say maybe even Resident Evil had slightly more cutscenes, albeit cheesier.
No, there's actually a fuck ton of cutscenes in this game.
I mean, like, there's a lot of exposition cutscenes, but like actual cutscenes, I mean, with like FMV.
Oh, well, yeah, no, because obviously for one guy, animating mouths to keep up with whatever the actors were saying was out of the question. You can hear things like them breathing or like a startled gasp, but you won't ever hear. It's not like Sybil will walk in and just like, so Harry Mason, we finally meet.
Yeah, when I'm in a movie, my boobs are going to be hanging all the way out for no reason.
That chick from The Walking Dead better do me justice. But, yeah. No, I mean, the FMVs, of course, were great, but the actual in-game cutscenes, I have to really give a kudos to the cast. It's not the best acting still, but for the era, it's still better than, like, RE96, obviously.
Oh my God, leagues better. Although that has its own place as well.
Yeah, but it's whether it was intentional or not, because I know some people get kind of pissy about it, and they're like, "Well, obviously they weren't going for that bizarro '70s cult movie feel. They were going for as serious as they could get, and they failed." And it's like, well, yes, but it still serves the story, and it still feels very surreal and very in place for the town, much like it did with the cast for the second game. The third game I felt was probably where the cast felt the most grounded and, you know, present in their story, but we'll get to that one if we ever review that game.
But this one, and I even want to say that, like, this one feels more grounded than even the second one, because the second one, like, just the way people talk, and they're so confused in Silent Hill 2, like, people just saying, huh, a lot, or, like, you know, when Guy Seehee does James Southern, he's like, yes, well, take me to marry, you know, and
my defense for that cast, and again, just forgive me for going mildly off topic on this one. Silent Hill 2, the way that game was presented, it's much more dreamlike. So the dialogue makes sense. It's part of why when we got the revamped cast for that terrible HD collection, Troy Baker floundered because he was trying so hard to give a grounded Oscar-winning performance. And it's like, that's not James Sunderland. That's not where he is right now. He's in that stage of grief where you're just like numb and floating and directionless, and you obviously have a purpose and a motivation. You are acting with a capital A, and it does not work for this project.
Yeah, me and Chavo have a sordid history with Troy Baker. We love some of his stuff, but overall,
he's only as good as the director he works under. And I don't mean to knock Mary Elizabeth McGlynn because she directed that cast, but yeah, no, that man found a way to overact breathing, so fuck him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even in Harry in this game, it was not overacted for his running out of breath, which is a great little thing they threw in here. You won't find that in a Resident Evil game, I don't think, ever.
There are a lot of recording mistakes I noticed. Like, I didn't notice it, you know, when I was first playing the game, but like looking back now that I have some experience in vocal production, there's things where you can hear characters are like taking a breath, but they literally just cut the line, and then they spliced in the other half with the rest of that breath when they respond to what a character is saying to them.
Yeah, that's true.
But I'll chalk it up to, again, the fact that it was 1999 and voice acting in video games was still, I don't want to say in its infancy, but they obviously had a lot of growing pains they needed to work through.
Yeah. But I mean, when you put this whole thing together, the fact that Konami thought it was going to be a fucking failure, they did not believe in it whatsoever. In fact, I don't think they ever believed in it, even after it was, you know, certified as a classic.
I felt they embraced it, but it still feels a little bit like how Paramount's relationship with Friday the 13th is. Like, oh, great, you make us money. Yeah, we'll play it up for the crowd, but we're not proud of this.
Yeah, we don't want to look at you. We just want to fuck you.
Exactly.
But yeah, so I mean, you know, the sort of history with that, you know, really rings true to me, and I feel so bad for Team Silent, because it's like, this is one beautiful piece of art, which I think video games are. And, you know, even getting to Alchemilla Hospital and all the boss fights, and after fighting the mutant larva and all that stuff, you know, you and the story unfolds, the more you get into this story, which is why when I played this again, I only played it like 2 years ago. I didn't play it when it came out. I was a big RE fan. I did play that when it came out, but 2 years ago, I beat this, and I'm like, wow, that was fucking phenomenal. And even today, I still think about it, and I'm like, oh my God, like, there was just so much put into this, you know? So much effort.
I will always fight and defend this game. It is, I want to say, one of my all-time favorites in the series. I know everyone loves Silent Hill 2, and Silent Hill 2 is definitely pretty damn close to being a masterwork in the genre. But with as much praise gets heaped on that, I think a lot of people tend to either forget about the first game or shit on it. Even though it's like, without this game, you wouldn't have had that one.
It's almost like Resident Evil 2 versus Resident Evil 1, but more extreme. It's like,
Yes.
yeah, Resident Evil 2 saved the series. Like, you wouldn't have a series without that if that wasn't successful. And it's like, yeah, that's very true. But people more of an inverse see, like, no, Silent Hill 2 was where it actually hit. Silent Hill 1 didn't even know what it was doing. And it's like, no, it knew what it was doing. It just didn't maybe hit as hard as Silent Hill 2 for most fans.
Well, here's the thing, when it comes to writing and establishing these worlds, it's not easy to build it from nothing. When you have a sequel that can work from something, you can go a bit more in depth. But when you have a game that's like the first in a potential franchise, and I don't even know if Konami had franchise plans when they made it.
Right.
It very much could have been a one and done game. But I feel like every game that preceded it, at least in the Team Silent era, definitely tried to escalate, tried to add layers, and try to, make this Rubik's Cube that is Silent Hill a little more complicated, a little more deep, a little more complex.
Right. And I tried to save this without talking about it for as long as I could. I almost wanted to save it for the end, but a perfect example of that is when you hear Akira Yamaoka's score and music in this video game, the whole soundtrack.
I was just going to say, I know I keep throwing out episode plans, but also we literally should just do an entire episode on the soundtracks of the series.
We really should.
Because we could talk, we've talked for hours about just the music, like story aside, and how each album for each game feels very distinct and different.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? We should just do a whole episode where it's Silent Hill 1 through 4, original Team Silent, original Akira, and then we'll do a bonus episode, a follow-up one where it's like everything after Team Silent,
Yeah, and for the record, I don't hate those games. I don't think every game that came out post Team Silent was terrible. There's actually some pretty good hidden gems and a lot of shit.
A good callback in Silent Hill Origins, which we're not going to go too way off topic, but I have to mention this, is because one of the next things you run into in this game is the Moth Boss, who is atop the water tower. It's got all this larva growing and all this bullshit. And this is one of the coolest boss fights to me, just the way it looks and, PS1 graphics. It's pretty massive for the time. Very cool how you have to go up the stairs and, end up there. Well, anyway, Silent Hill Origins, which came out later on the PSP and PS2, you can actually run by the post office in that game, and you can see larvae growing on the post office where you fight the moth. So nice, it is a nice fucking callback. Yeah, it's such a cool callback.
That was such a bizarre moment in the game. You're hunting for your kid. You're in a town that's gone horribly, horribly wrong, and now you're fucking fighting Mothra.
Yeah. But, and then you go into the sewers, which a lot of people I know have said is their least favorite part of the game. Not for me. I love fucking everything about this. And you get to the resort, which we should make a distinction that there is an old Silent Hill town and a new Silent Hill, which are very much connected, although be it from Toluca Lake.
That's another thing the game touches on, and a wonderful part of the world building. Essentially, Silent Hill was an old-fashioned town. It was just a normal, isolated townstead, and then it started getting developed into a resort town, and you can see evidence of that with the tourist location, which is the third part of the town you get to visit. And then you get to visit the shopping district, which is the second part, after you complete Old Silent Hill. And it has a giant mall in it with all these modernish stores. The game takes place in the 1980s. So it's as modern as it could be back then. You have a Virgin Giga store, but they can't call it Virgin. So it's Vestal.
There's no punk rock in this town because it is a small town, but
But they do love their Portishead because there's posters for Portishead at the diner.
Yeah, another small little Easter egg is I think it's kindergarten cop posters.
Well, no, the entire school level's modeled after the Astoria Elementary building.
You're right. In Kindergarten Cop with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Which makes sense. Like, we need to make an American town. All right, go to Blockbuster and get a bunch of these movies and let's go. So the amusement park, I'm not going to lie, was kind of a disappointing section of the game for me, just because it's so barren. You walk around in like this huge metal grated area, and you can catch glimpses of certain rides, but you can't really interact with most of them. One of them plays music. You can come across a concession stand where you can save, and you can see, like, eventually you end up on the merry-go-round for a boss fight with Sybil, who's been taken by whatever is controlling the puppet nurses. And yeah, I just feel like there's so much they could have done with that level, especially compared to when they revisit that area in Silent Hill 3, and it's a much more fleshed out locale with, actual locations and rides and, things you can explore that can kill you. It felt very much like the team either ran out of time or steam by the end of production, and they were just like, fuck it, we need to get to the next boss fight, and we need to get to the final act of this game right now.
Sybil fight, again, who is the police officer that gives you a firearm. Very much nicer than the officer in Resident Evil 7.
Gives you a gun. A complete stranger. She gives you a gun. But you know what? It was the 80s, so I'm going to assume maybe he's a white guy in a white town in the 80s. So I'm just like, if there's anyone I trust here, it's going to be you. Here, take this.
You jerk. Yeah, and keep the bullets, you filthy animal. This whole thing with the amusement park, though, again, like you said, it wouldn't be the last time we visit this area. We also do in Silent Hill 3. But it also wouldn't be the last time we fight a boss on the merry-go-round either, which is another callback later on in the series. But yeah, you eventually go through this whole area, and I forget, is it Alchemilla? Or no, it's the part after this.
We don't go back to the hospital after this point, because essentially what happens is Harry ends up confronting Alessa, and she has no time for his shit. She knocks him out, and then Dahlia shows up and knocks Alessa out, and that's when we find out, big twist, oh my god, Alessa wasn't the bad guy all along. She was actually trying to save everybody. Oh no, it's her mom who's pulling all the strings, and you get teleported to nowhere, which is essentially, I don't know what the general consensus is for where exactly nowhere is, but I feel like it's you literally teleport into Alessa's mind, because it's this mashup of all these locations linked by hospital hallways. Some areas look exactly like classrooms from her school. Some areas look like other locations you visited, like a jewelry store from the mall for some reason. I have a feeling there may have been a connection, but they never got around to putting it in there.
To me, it honestly just feels like the world is falling apart at the end. And Dahlia reveals that she's her mother. And, nowhere makes no sense, because this is where the game gives you your final greatest challenge almost. It takes away your map, and you just literally have to memorize where you're going in the game.
You have 3 floors, 2 hallways with rooms that, again, make no sense because they're all rooms taken from various locations. Dahlia's antique shop is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say, and then the top floor is like this weird altar, which I wish they had done.
I agree. But this is where the culmination of the story finally comes about. And it kind of gives you a very good set of exposition where Harry sees a flashback for Alessa and Dahlia arguing, and Alessa, resists her mother taking her somewhere, and she says she just wants it to be the two of them forever. And Dahlia says, she's hungry for some of Alessa's power, and she's got an idea. She ceases tugging on Alessa's hand, and from the look on Dahlia's face, she suddenly understands. This is where Dahlia concocts the plan to sacrifice her daughter to experiment with her soul.
Well, yeah, essentially because Alessa doesn't want to use her powers anymore as the cult's enforcer. Essentially, her plan is to set fire to their house, burn and incapacitate her daughter so she can exploit and use the powers without having to worry about placating her or talking her into it.
Mm-hmm. And we fall into the first of many Silent Hill games where you don't just get one ending, you get many. There's a plethora of endings.
Five endings in total, I remember right.
Mm-hmm. And well, I know of the one I got, which was the good one, I believe, where you do this subplot with Dr. Kaufman, and you get the liquid from some building, and you throw it on Sybil.
Okay, so no, those are two separate things. Early on in the game, when you're in the hospital, if you go into the director's office, you find a pink liquid smashed up on the ground. Like there was a vial in his desk, someone smashed it. They obviously didn't want that stuff to be used for whatever its purpose was. And you can collect some and take it with you in a plastic bottle you can steal from the kitchen. And if you use that in the Sybil boss fight, and as much as I wish it was canon, it really isn't, because it makes no sense. Why would you just out of nowhere like, oh, I need to throw this pink liquid in your face. Hopefully that'll save my life. It kills the thing on her back, and that's where we actually get a very important bit of the story. It's where Harry reveals Cheryl is adopted and that he found her on the outskirts of town with his terminally ill wife 7 years prior. A very important bit of backstory that I don't think is elaborated on in like the game proper. And then the side quest with Kaufman, it requires you to make a detour. You can stop at a bar in the resort area of town, and you'll find him being attacked, and he drops an envelope with a motorcycle key, or no, a hotel room key, and a receipt for the local convenience store with a passcode written on it. You can go to the convenience store and read the diary of the store owner and find out that the town is like running its drug, the cult is running its drug market through the town's businesses they're selling to tourists, and that it's like things are getting really scary and creepy, and like the guy who runs the store doesn't really want any part of it anymore. And you can find like drugs being stored in the store safe. And you can go to the hotel and like end up doing this weird roundabout thing where you can find a magnet, pull a key out of the floor, and it's for a motorcycle, open the gas tank and find like another vial of that pink stuff that was smashed up in Kaufman's office.
That's right. That's what I did.
And he steals it. He shows up really pissed off and takes it from you. And Harry's like, geez, he was really mad. Oh, well, I've wasted enough time doing this. I have to find Cheryl. And then that's when you like make way towards the lighthouse.
Yeah, there's some very bizarre endings here. I think the canon one, correct me if I'm wrong, Chavo, is that the great demon crashes to the floor, Alessa stirs, the sky rains fireballs, but Dahlia is no longer in control, and Alessa finally is free of her nightmares. She looks at you with the face of an angel. You glimpse Cheryl's face and Alessa's, and she hands you a tightly bundled baby. That's
the good ending, the regular good ending. The person who wrote that guide at the time wouldn't have been keen on this, but we learned later that wasn't Alessa or Cheryl. That was the god themselves, the incubator, the low-key trying to make sure that they don't actually die, so they reincarnate Alessa and Cheryl as this baby and give it to Harry in the hopes of like, all right, well, I'm going to have to try again later. And Harry ends up like escaping into the town, or out of the town, and the CG cutscene we're treated to in that ending is him like ending up back on the road he was driving into town on, and like looking up devastated and confused.
Alessa that we see dying in that whole end cutscene, she points to like a place outside of the darkness where you're at and nowhere, and that's where you escape to.
Yeah, she opens up an exit. Oh, see, the good plus ending adds Sybil to the equation, where she like wakes up after being knocked out and she runs out with you. And then they do a version of the intro cutscene where Harry and his wife finds the baby, except they replace his wife with Sybil, implying like, oh, they're going to be a couple now.
Yeah, it has it here in the guide. It does say good, bad plus. I don't know, you can get a bad plus, but good plus and bad ending. And then there's the UFO ending.
That one you can get after any first-time playthrough. You find a channeling stone in the knockoff 7-Eleven in town, and you have to use it, I believe, in like 5 different locations. The last one being the lighthouse, which summons all the aliens who show up, and it turns out aliens are behind everything going on in the town, and they end up zapping Harry and taking him off into space.
Yeah, which is a common thread that continues into the other games where you can always get a UFO ending.
Well, that's the beautiful thing about endings in Silent Hill. They actually all have their own continuity. Well, most of them have their own continuity. The UFO endings are all connected. They all reference the previous games UFO endings.
Mm-hmm.
Like in Silent Hill 3 or Silent Hill 2's has Harry coming down in a UFO with an alien and zapping James and kidnapping him as well. So you could play through a good chunk of the series and just be like, yep, that's the canon ending.
Yeah, it's pretty neat too because, Resident Evil only has, well, I guess I shouldn't say the first game, but there's only really one ending to every story in Resident Evil or Alone in the Darkness or any of the other horror games that came out at the time, Parasite Eve, whereas Silent Hill really went out of its way to say, no, we'll give you like 5, you decide.
Yeah,
Silent
usually
but deadly.
Parasite Eve gave us 2 endings, well, the extended X game ending, and then Resident Evil gave us 3, technically 6 if you want to count the character, like both characters. Gave us 6 endings, basically depending on who you took time to save, and it was literally like an extra shot, and that's it. And then you have Silent Hill, where we get kind of 4-ish definitive different endings, since like 2 of them are very similar to each other and literally only add Sybil to the equation.
Mm-hmm.
Bad, positive, and bad, the regular bad endings are actually fairly different. In the bad ending, to get that, the bad positive ending, you have to save Sybil, but you don't save Kaufman, so he never shows up to interfere with the god, and you end up having to shoot the incubator, which looks like a grown-up Alessa. And Harry collapses, and like Sybil wakes up and she slaps him, and she's like, Harry, we have to go, but he's just like too devastated to get up because his daughter's dead. Like, there's no baby, there's nothing, he has nothing to go on for. And then the regular bad ending, the worst ending you can get, is it turns out the entire thing is a dream and Harry's dying in his Jeep because he crashed his car.
Right. It's very there's no definitive ending because even in the sequel it somehow still continues some of those endings like the UFO one. Whereas Resident Evil, even though it has 6 endings, there's only canon. Yeah, there's only one that could be loosely translated to canon, and that's that, whoever's there survived.
Yeah. There's no definitive one on that one, just because for some reason, when they did the remake, they were like, we're not going to do a definitive version of the story. We're still going to keep it 2 separate sides.
Yeah, that's super weird. But, that kind of adds to the mystery and the overall eeriness of Silent Hill. There's no one true answer to any of it. There's no one basis of why the town does what it does or why it tries to keep people there or let people survive by overcoming whatever it is they need to do. There's absolutely no answer to that, and I absolutely at the same time adore it.
It's weird, and the vagueness of it is a structure. It does have a reason for existing the way it exists, and I don't want to say it's not like the town's like, come on, work past those traumas, push through, you can do this, because it's not a life coach. It just happens to be a very convenient situation where your internal darkness is flipped inside out and becomes external, and you literally have to shoot your trauma away and deal with your shit.
Yep, 1-2 kick to the dick.
Yeah, exactly. And I think part of the reason people favor Silent Hill 2 more over this one is because there's a little less mystery to it all. Like, it really is, a lot of this is stuff orchestrated by the cult, and the mystery lies more in finding out Alessa's past. It's not Harry's personal hell we're navigating through in this story. It's Alessa's. Whereas Silent Hill 2, I feel, is when things got a lot more personal, because you're dealing with the actual protagonist's trauma, and by extension, visiting other people's trauma in the game. You get a new structure that kind of feels more secure and feels more like, okay, I know where I stand in this world, as opposed to the first game where you're constantly disoriented and being thrown around to different areas around town at Alessa's will.
Yeah, the second one definitely explores more like, oh, well, there's more people here than me and our worlds collide. on what the town is bringing forward from our minds and our deeper fears and so on and so forth. They're colliding, whereas in this one you're just a puppet again, like everything else almost.
Yeah, which it does make the story a little bit more on the simpler side, but I still think there's something to appreciate in the simplicity. And I don't know, it just overall the game feels like a low budget horror film from the 70s and 80s that I would enjoy watching over and over again on VHS, you know?
100%, 100%. And we probably will go through the rest of the series, I want to say, but before we even leave here, because that's basically the whole game, and I hope we touched on some things that people didn't know or haven't heard 20 times already before, but Akira Yamaoka's music in this one, it is not my favorite Silent Hill soundtrack, but I will say that for his first outing and experimental, this is definitely more industrial than the melodies he would bring in 2, 3, and 4 even, and even afterwards with Mary Elizabeth and everything. But this is 100% more industrial, more experimental. I mean, he doesn't.
Atmospheric.
He's just atmospheric. He's trying to figure it out here, and it just still comes off as just bleeding cool and just so awesome. And the dude deserves all the praise. He is, in my opinion, pretty much 50% of Silent Hill. The team creates the game. Yeah, the team created everything else: the molding, the body, the flesh, the nerves, the gags, whatever, the laughs. But Akira at the end of the day was the heart of it.
Yeah, the heart and soul. Like he, I think, helped bring the emotion, the music. The times he allows it to get melodic really brings the emotion forward. Like it may have been the first half of Not Tomorrow on the soundtrack, but the music that plays when Lisa's talking about who she is and what she knows about herself now, like when she's figured out the truth, it's a gentle piano melody, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, and heartbreaking.
Of course, in the worst ending, we get some weird tracks too. Like the worst ending has a song called Esperandote or Esperando, something along those lines, and it's like this weird Spanish song with accordion, and it's still great. It's a great listen, but it just feels so weird and like Italian horror almost.
Yeah, almost Jello in a way.
Yeah.
Jello being Italian horror, like Chava said, in case anyone's confused. But
Giallo.
Giallo. But they pronounce it Giallo. But anyway.
Oh, they do.
Yeah.
Something new every day. Sorry.
I do have a story about meeting Akira, but I'm going to save it for when we cover the second game. Not only that, but I also own the soundtrack on vinyl. Yeah, I'm such a hipster. No, it was something I wanted to hear on the softer, more vibrant sounds of vinyl, so that's why I got it. And I also have Akira and Mary Elizabeth's autographs, which I will show in this video at the end. Me just kind of showing off the art of what I got them to sign it on, which is at Sabaton Con. It was a con, Sabaton Con 2019 or something. It was before the pandemic. But yeah, anyways, that's Silent Hill, man. Anything else to add, Chava?
Honestly, I had a question, but I want to save it for a later episode because I feel we're going to need material for that. But I will say, I really did love revisiting this game. It still holds up. It has a very big unpolished charm to it, like polished yet mildly tarnished with time charm to it. It really does feel, like I said, like a low budget horror flick that you would find and watch on like an old TV back in the day. It's still available digitally on the PlayStation Store now that that's got a temporary reprieve. So if you have a PS3, nab it while you can, because it's a great play, and you're not going to find it for the price they have it on there physically.
Yeah, and again, I always advocate for this. People who are afraid to play horror games, which is why they don't sell as much as like Grand Theft Auto or whatever the fuck. You're not going to be terrified by this game. Yeah, it has a little couple gags, little things that are going to try and psych you out. And that's just part of the charm of Team Silent and what the work they put into these things,
There's
That's
some
just
good jump scares,
Mm-hmm. They fuck with you. They do a good job of it. But aside from those few couple things, man, it's just such a joy to go through this. It's not. I don't feel the horror surpasses the joy. It's definitely a mix of both for me, at least. And playing it like 2 years ago, I fell in love with this game, and I had some trepidations about it. I was like, I don't know, going back to a PS1 game, I made all the excuses in my mind, but no, it surpassed all of those things. It's a classic, certified classic in my mind.
Hopefully we'll get a remake at some point. I've been hearing rumors that Konami, among the rumors of like the Metal Gear remake, they're like, they might actually get around to doing a Silent Hill remake. And I'm like, go for it, but bring Akira back for the music.
Yeah, please, God. But yeah, that's Silent Hill, and thanks for everyone coming around and listening to this. You'll find more horror stuff, more comic-centric stuff here on Millennial Man. And thanks for being on here, Chava.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everyone, have a good night.
Good night, folks.